You know, for the last 4 weeks, we've been addressing what I've called the legs of manhood. And I say the legs of manhood because those are the legs that are given to us in our youthfulness by a mom and by a dad. And what those two powerful forces do or don't do for a boy growing up, leave him later in adult life with either strong and steady legs to stand on as he stands up in his full masculinity, or it leaves him with weak and unsteady legs that need braces. Or maybe in a few cases here, you look down and what you need is a prosthesis because one or both of the legs are missing. I say all that because sometimes our natural legs of manhood, mom and dad fail to support us the way that they should have for one reason or another. And we then have to ask the question, hopefully that's why you're here, you're asking the question, then what? Then what? If they didn't give me these legs, if I feel like they're braces or something's missing, there's just stumps there, then what? And the answer is, you don't quit, you don't play the victim, you don't blame others. You stand up and act like a man and move forward. That's what you do. And that's what we're encouraging you to do this whole year. So this morning we're going to address how to act responsibly with mom. That's what we started last week, but how to act responsibly with mom, especially a mother who's overplayed her hand in your life. And she's been unwilling to let go for one reason or another. How do you deal with a mom like that in a responsible way? Well, we introduced to you what that wound was because I called it the overly bonded with mother wound. We saw an illustration of that in the movie clip. But let me again define it for you here on the screen. Here's what we said that wound was. We said it was an unhealthy, emotional relationship with mother that causes a son to either be threatened by the influence of women later on or to over-identify and remain dependent on that influence and submissive to it. With a mother wound, there can develop two extreme forms of masculinity rather than the balanced masculinity that we talked about some weeks back. And those two consequences are these. First, sons can become overly passive in regard to women. In yielding to mom's influences that go on even after they needed to be cut into adulthood, a son sacrifices his masculinity. He over-identifies with his mother. He becomes, as we talked about last week, feminized. He learns to react in ways that are more appropriate to a woman than to a man. He places high emphasis on his feelings because of that over-identification with the key woman in his life. He learns to wait rather than initiate because he learned that from mom. He shuns risk-taking. And as he becomes an adult, he looks to a woman to care for him in the same way he looked to mom to care for him. He has that invisible emotional umbilical cord. And he's moving around to connect that into another woman if he can't connect it into mom. 3 words identify the man who becomes overly passive in regards to women because of his relationship with mom. The soft male. You have that on the screen and you probably wonder why I have fantasy and porn there. I want to mention one thing as an aside, so let me step aside here for a minute. When a man grows up in a home and he over-identifies with his mom and he feels threatened or over-identifies and feels submissive to that relationship, there's a man inside of him that wants to get out and lead and be a man with women. But it's been suppressed. And so as he moves through life, he feels like he wilts in the presence of women. And if he gets married, he wilts in the presence of his wife. But there's a man in there that wants to get out. And if he doesn't handle it in a healthy way, then he fantasizes about how he would handle it. But he does it in an unhealthy way. So a lot of men who become what I call the soft male or the feminized man, not effeminate, feminized. A lot of men get attached in a very unhealthy way to pornography, because it's the one place that they can go in a fantasy relationship where they feel like they can act like a man in regards to women without being suppressed or by that woman or over-identifying in a way that he has to submit to that woman. He can kind of be the leader in that fantasy relationship. And if pornography is a problem with you, and it's a problem not just with this first case of extreme masculinity, but also in the second case, a lot of times it goes back to these inadequacies that we developed in regards to mother. The soft male, the feminized man. Another phrase is the passive husband who has connected with a mother wife. That's who he married. Someone who would continue to take care of him the same way mom did. And as I said last week, in the beginning, that strong woman with that strong warrior sees him as a sensitive male, but after they're married, begins to resent him for his lack of initiative. So the first consequence is sons can become overly passive in regard to women. Secondly, sons can become overly dominant in regard to women if they have been threatened by mom. And what happens in this is the son, in growing up with mom, contends with her and resists her influence over his life, and it finally distorts his masculinity, and that's what he takes out into the world with him. He sees women later on after mom as a constant threat to his masculinity. He sees them as seeking to control him. And because of that, he becomes too strong in his relationships with women, too demanding. He develops a my way or the highway kind of mentality. He's threatened by any woman's assertiveness. And when he gets in a marriage, when a woman tries to express herself, her feelings, her rights, her equalities, he sees that as an attack on his masculinity. And he feels like he has to dominate that and rule over that and suppress that, or else it's going to control him. But really what he's doing is shadowboxing with his past. As an adult, he looks for a woman who will give him what he wants and give in to his desires. If he's a Christian man, he loves the word submit. He loves that word because it speaks right to the issue of his wound. 3 phrases that describes the man who becomes overly dominant early in his relationship with mom would be this: a conquering masculinity. And it's in its extreme forms, and we see it all the time, don't we, in our world today? In extreme forms, it leads to domestic violence, abuse, rape. You know what rape is? Rape is a guy who's so threatened by women that this is his way of getting even. But it has roots that go way back in that regard. Secondly, what I call a fierce independence, because that person fears being vulnerable in the presence of women. He has a real difficult time opening his heart to a woman. And the reason he does is because if he feels like if he did that, she'd take advantage and take control. So he's got this fierce independence. It's also expressed in the demanding husband who makes demands over his wife and rules his household kind of with an iron fist. Now, as you look at those 2 extreme forms, every one of us in the room, we're on this kind of pole. If those are the poles, the overly passive here and the overly dominant here, those are the poles. You might ask yourself, where on those poles do I find myself? That's a good question to ask. Do I lean one way or the other? A lot of that, as I said, goes back to our relationship in those primal beginnings with mom. Now, I know this wound is difficult to talk about because, as I said last week, I'm not here to beat up mom. That's not the intent. Because oftentimes the wound is inflicted, as we mentioned last week, not because mom intended to hurt you. In fact, this wound is often inflicted more out of love than neglect. The problem is that the love and concern goes too far. And it gives too much. And it gets too involved. And as payment, it asks too much in return. That's the problem. And every son needs a healthy emotional break with mom that takes him out of mom's orbit, that establishes a healthy, separate identity, which enables him later on, when he's finally an adult, in the full bloom of his masculinity, to relate to a woman in life, not out of need, desperate need, and not out of an over-dependence, but to relate to her out of a healthy give and take relationship of two separate, healthy individuals. Now that sounds good, but I want you to know, every mom has difficulty with this. Even the best of moms. Even Jesus' mom. Did you know that? I want to give you 4 snapshots into Jesus' relationship with his mother. First of all, I want you to look here. We'll put it on the screen and just read it. Luke chapter 2. Jesus is 12 years old. And here's a moment in the life of a mother and son. And as they were returning after spending the full number of days, the boy Jesus, he is a boy, but he's a changing boy. He's 12 years old. He's probably going through puberty at this particular period of time. The boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, and his parents weren't aware of it, but supposed him to be in the caravan. They went a day's journey, and they began looking for him among their relatives and acquaintances. And they did not find him, and they returned to Jerusalem looking for him. And it came about that after 3 days, that's a long time looking for your boy. You'd be upset, wouldn't you? He's missing for 3 days. They found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the teachers, both listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. They were already getting a sense of who this guy was extraordinary. And when they saw Jesus, they were astonished. And then notice this. And his mother said to him, not his dad, his mother. She steps forward. Now, you know, it's interesting in Scripture. Nowhere do we hear Joseph say anything. Now, I'm not saying Joseph was a weak man. But what I am saying is it's real clear from Scripture that Mary was a strong woman. And she initiates in this moment. And his mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us this way?" Now notice, if Dad was speaking, he wouldn't say it that way, would he? He said, "What in the fat are you doing?" He would speak on a task level. But not Mom. She doesn't speak that way, does she? She has a whole different language. "Son, why have you treated us this way?" Let me paraphrase. Why have you hurt your mama? Why would you do this to me? Now, the reason I tell you that is because Mary, of all people, should have known. It was Mary to whom the angel Gabriel had appeared, right? It was to Mary who the angel said, "You're going to bear Emmanuel, God with us." And it says that she treasured all those things in her heart. Oh, she had a certain clarity about the relationship all along. But see, even when you have the Son of God, you're still a mother. And that gets all mixed together, doesn't it? So Jesus, in this moment, gives her some relational clarity. He's only 12, but he's sharp. So he says, "Why is it that you were looking for me? Did you not know that I had to be in my Father's house?" And of course, it says, they did not understand the statement which he had made to them. But they should have. And for Mary in particular. But you know what you hear in this moment? If you look closely between the lines? you hear, cut, cut. There's an umbilical cord, an invisible one, that's being snipped in this moment. Then I want you to look at a second passage. This occurred when Jesus was 30 years old. Now, he's not a boy now. He's a man. And there's a social moment here as Jesus is about to inaugurate His public ministry, or he's actually in the first part of His public ministry. And in John 2 it says, "And on the third day there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. And Jesus also was invited, and His disciples, to the wedding. And when the wine gave out," now just imagine, it's a party. It's a social situation. There are people there having fun together, and the wine gives out. And the mother of Jesus said to Him, "They have no wine." Do you hear a message in that, guys? Let me say it probably the way Jesus heard it. Boy, they have no wine. You're God. And that's exactly how it felt. And you can feel it. There's orders being given. They're not being given direct the way a man would say it. They're being given indirectly through the relationship, "You owe me, I'm your mother." And what does Jesus say? "Well, Mom, come on." No, He doesn't say that. He speaks as a man who doesn't want to be bonded in this way. And He doesn't say, "Mom." He says, and listen, it's strong, isn't it? Woman, what do I have to do with you? Don't push me. That's what's happening here. Cut. That's what you're feeling. But notice, he's a 30-year-old man. Don't tell me what to do. Maybe another way of paraphrasing, take your umbilical cord away from me. I don't want it. There's a third situation. Look here in Matthew chapter 12. It's 2 years later. Jesus is well into His ministry. And there's some spiritual clarity that needed to be given to Mom. It says in Matthew 12, "While He was still speaking to the multitudes, behold, His mother and His brothers were standing outside, seeking to speak to Him. And someone said to Him, 'Behold, your mother and your brothers are standing outside seeking to speak to you.'" Now, let's just ask the question. There's this one called someone. See it there in the text? How do you think that someone was sent? You don't think this someone was commissioned directly by Mary? Just listen to the request. Your mother, behold, your mother is out here with your brothers wanting to speak to you. But He answered the one who was telling Him and said, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" And stretching out His hand towards His disciples, He said, "Behold, my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father who is in heaven, he is my brother and my sister and my mother." Cut. Go tell Mom that. Now, you would think, well, man, they must have had a tough relationship. No, they really didn't have a tough relationship. I think they had a sweet relationship. I think Jesus honored His mother His whole life. And I think she felt honored. But there's that constant kind of movement going on in their relationship. Now, all this comes to an interesting ending at the cross. And I want you to see this because it's a very healthy ending. Jesus is 33. He's being crucified. John 19 tells us the story, but what you need to see before I read the passage is that Jesus kept His mom from rebonding with Him. But here's what I want you to hear. Listen to this very closely. In keeping her at a certain healthy distance, she did not lose Jesus as a son. Listen, she gained back Jesus as a man. That's what happened here. who has a healthy self-identity in and of his own right. And listen to what it says here. They were standing by the cross of standing by the cross of Jesus, his mother and his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. And Jesus hanging on the cross, when he saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved, that's John, standing nearby, he said to his mother on the cross, "Mother, behold your son." You knew this from the very beginning. Here I am. But here's what I think he's telling her. Here's the message. Here's your son, a man. And you would have never put me here. You would have kept me from this because you love me so much. Behold, your son. And then in the midst of the pain and agony of that moment, look what he does. He says to the disciple John, "John, behold your mother." And he got the message, didn't he? Because from that hour, the disciple took her into his own household. You know what that means? That means at the end, Mary wasn't caring for Jesus, the boy. Jesus, the man, was caring for his mother. And that's the way it should be in adulthood. You know, I can remember I told you about my mom and my dad and all the issues that went on between them and how oftentimes I was pulled into that relationship to negotiate their troubled marriage. Even after I was married, had kids, and would come back to see Mom, periodically we'd be sitting there, just be her and we would fall into that old mother-boy kind of rut. And she'd kind of suck me in and begin to talk to me about my dad, what he needed to do, and get me to try to side with her. We'd have those little moments along the way. I never forget one moment. Part of it's because I'd gotten a little older and a little wiser by that time. She started into that rut, and I stopped her. And I looked at her and I said, "Mama, you will never, ever control me. So stop trying." And I don't know why that was such a magical moment, but I remember she leaned back and kind of laughed for a moment. And from that day on, she never tried to control me again. But I also remember back in 1986 when my mother had cancer and she was dying. For 2 years, I'd been driving weekends back to Ruston, my hometown, to take care of her. Dad was dead then. Helping her with her finances, helping her with her living conditions, and all those kind of things. Just caring for my mom. But on this particular Easter Sunday morning, the doctor just told me that all the cancer that she had been experiencing had now moved into her brain, and she had just a couple of months to live. And I was supposed to go tell her that, my mother. So I went into the room, and I remember her sitting there and gently just broke the news to her that the cancer had advanced to her brain. She knew exactly what that meant. But in that moment, on that Easter morning, she looked up to me, and I'll never forget this, guys, and here's what she said to me. She said, "Robert, I want you to know how good it has been over the last 2 years to have been protected by a man." And that's the way it should be. From a boy to a man. That's the healthy break with Mom. Now, what I want to do is give you 7 suggestions for you for healing this wound. Just 7 suggestions. Here's the first, because now we need to move in your life, wherever you are. First, always start with the understanding that breaking Mom's over-involvement, if that's the case with you, now that's not the case with every guy here, is good for you and her. Now, it's not going to feel like that in the beginning, but it is, because authentic manhood is impossible without it. As long as you are tied to Mom in some unhealthy way, look, guys, as long as you're tied to Mom in some unhealthy way, if it's small or large, it's going to stunt your quest for masculinity. Secondly, recognize that your ultimate goal is to become a man whose vision is fixed on what God thinks, not on what mom thinks. Now, that's assuming that you have a spiritual vision for your life. If you don't, this wouldn't necessarily apply. But if you have a spiritual vision for your life, you've finally got to turn and decide, what does God think of my life, not what mom thinks of my life. And you know, Jesus was strong on this point. Here's the way he said it in Matthew 10:37. He said, "He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me." You can't be tied back there. You've got to leave and cleave to me. Real manhood begins when a man begins to ask this question: God, what kind of man do you want me to be? I think that's the question you guys are asking. That's why you're here. And I think that's a noble question. And I'm hoping that over the course of this year, in a large measure, you'll have an answer for that. And then it becomes an act of will and faith, and that is, are you going to follow that vision, or you're going to keep yourself tied to the past? And that's going to be what the real issue will be at that point. Third, stop complaining or struggling with mom. If you have this wound, get the support, encouragement, and help you need from other men or a counselor if necessary, if it's serious at that level. And here's the key: and develop a plan for healthy independence from mom. And underline the word healthy. Invite those men's feedback to avoid serious errors in making the break. You know, Proverb 27:17 is iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. If you're struggling in this area, you need other men to talk to kind of get what I call a balanced clarity on what's really going on. And then out of that, you formulate a plan to make what I call a healthy, not an unhealthy break, because you can make an unhealthy break. You can wield an axe. And that's not how you love your mom. We're talking about making a healthy break to help make you a healthy man. And to do that, you need a specific plan. Now, let me tell you three things about the plan. First, this plan should address specific issues that are troublesome to you with specific applications. It may be your mom's interference in your marriage. It may be the excessive time demands that she